of work and some triadal work and some discussion of aspects of the monad. And now we're going to get maybe into the more nitty-gritty. I don't think we can worry about which particular monad we're actually touching, whether it's on the monadic plane or something very primary in the sea of fire. I think, you know, the qualities will be similar. So Francis is going to, isn't that a fantastic image? The sons of power. Francis is going to take us into the sea of fire. You do have to remember, because there's only 5 billion of these, either on Earth or, it's really, it varies, you know. 5 billion is not a big number when you think about the solar system. It's really not. And so sometimes I begin to think that these numbers are more appropriate.
5 billion.
You know what I mean?
He's got it all.
Okay, he's got it.
But it does give you some idea how few.
Yeah, that's really,
yeah.
That's not a lot. Okay, so Francis will take us into the first ray monad. Just remember that you're in the minority when you're a first ray monad, and a lot of them individualize very late, like in Atlantis, you know, so not so many around of any developmental level. I'm just trying to think about whether I should bother going there.
Well, it's open. You're welcome. I can step out and you can step in.
Okay.
Don't fall down. Okay. 3 souls, 1 man. So you have the appropriate soul listed here on the right to what's being discussed here by Robert Browning. So 3 souls, which make up 1 soul. First, to wit, a soul of each and all the bodily parts, seated therein, which works and is what does, and has the use of earth, and ends the man downward, but tending upward for advice, grows into and again is grown into by the next soul, which seated in the brain, useth the first with its collected use, and feeleth, thinketh, willeth, is what knows, which duly tending upward in its turn, grows into and again is grown into by the last soul that uses both the first, subsisting whether they assist or no, and constituting man's self is what is, and leans upon the former, makes it play, as that played off the first, and tending up, holds, is upheld by God, and ends the man upward in that dread point of intercourse, nor needs a place, for it returns to him. So in theosophical speak, that last part would take you, all the way up into the cosmic monadic. This is like reversed, and I didn't want to reverse the chart, because so I just segmented it and put it out this way, that you can get a sense, as we go through. Okay. So this last soul is, of course, the monad. Quote, constituting man's self is what is. Okay, first of all, I, of course, have no direct experience with first ray energy as it impacts monadic levels. Wait. I'm getting something. Oh, I think it was that sauce I had for dinner. Okay, Michael talked about this chart quite a bit, and this whole idea of the double monadic levels. So that frees up more time for me, which is terrific. However, I might re-emphasize that the distinction between the 2 groups of monads, as described here, lies in the fact that the so-called secondary level monads inhabits a monadic vehicle. Remember, we were talking about, when it's time to take one of the cosmic paths, that you're going to have to park your vehicle in the cosmic physical plane because there's no way it's going anywhere, right? So that's going to be that final shift from, B to A, so to speak. And the fact that, and I want to show you this, just because I want to share this chart with you, that the monadic ray conditions the mental unit. Now, my understanding is it's the same ray. Is that right? The monad and the mental unit?
A monad conditions the ray of the mental vehicle.
Okay.
And so in other words, that quality would be there, regardless, I suppose.
Of your own monad.
Yeah, regardless of the ray of your mind, there would be an overlay from the monadic.
And it would be your monadic ray.
Your monadic ray.
Right.
Yeah, and your mind would carry that quality.
Right, okay, that's how I understand it. So you can see that, you have access to that, not to the energy as it expresses on monadic levels, but to the ray type just through the mental unit, which is readily accessible to all of us, right? So now we get to this, which Michael, I was wondering how much more of my lecture he was going to give. Just 8% of all monads are first-ray monads. There's 5 out of 60 billion in all. And very few of these will seek incarnation until the 7th root race. They come in at particular times. It's very peculiar, and it creates an interesting discussion in terms of when they've chosen to come in. Stanza 9 of the stanzas of Zhang alludes to this. Quote, "The sons of power stayed in their appointed place, though cosmic karma forced a handful to join the sons of heart." Okay. Old commentary from stanza 9 in that beginning section of Treatise of Cosmic Fire. DK says, and this is, the famous quote, as to the first-rate egos, and we'll come back to that word egos, there are no pure first-rate types on the planet. He doesn't say no pure first-rate monads. He says types, which is really open, right? All so-called first-rate egos, there we are again with that word, are on the first subray of the second ray, which is in incarnation. So if you thought you were understanding it before, a pure first-rate ego in incarnation at this time would be a disaster. There is not sufficient intelligence and love in the world to balance the dynamic will of an ego on the ray of the destroyer. So what does that mean? And I could open this up here. Ego is a very interesting term. It just means a discrete unit. Like it comes from egg, doesn't it, originally?
Yeah, ego, Greek I am.
Yeah, ego. So I am what? Is this a monadic description? But he doesn't capitalize it here in this old commentary, and there are other places where he actually contrasts two egos, one capitalized E with a small e. And anyway, your guess is as good as mine. But we can back off a bit and get it that there certainly are no, for instance, first-ray monads channeling through a first-ray soul. I would say that's safe to say that that's not happening. But, these beings still exist. They're discarnate. They're doing work, on other planes. It's just that they're not in incarnation, right? Interestingly, the planetary logos itself has a first-ray monad, if I read this right. DK says, it is the monadic ray of our planetary logos. He doesn't, whose soul ray is the second and personality ray the third. You can note, therefore, how the transmitting ray of our planetary logos is the first, and hence the place which the will plays in our human evolutionary process. Okay? So many first-ray monads came in during the moon chain, but they won't be back en masse until the 7th root race, which will, quote, mark a point of achievement for the monads of will, just as the present Aryan race marks the achievement of monads of intelligence. Right? So, if you want to meet one of these folks, you have to go either here or here. The atomic subplanes of the monadic or UDI planes, though we've had a discussion in terms of their involvement with this place, the atomic permanent atom, and certainly they're going to be expressing through that permanent atom. Just how, we don't know. Not that much information is given about these first-ray monads on their own plane, right? First-ray types, yeah, but a lot, in fact, but as you might expect. Okay, so this proposed visit is not as impossible as it seems. Paul of Tarsus did it when he penetrated into what he wrote of as being the third heaven, the realm of monadic expression. DK tells us that though teaching on the will or power aspect was basically not done at the time of Paul of Tarsus, because it was beyond their ability to understand, that today these teachings can form a true part of the realization of humanity. So, which means basically that, you know, what we're doing in this class isn't entirely ridiculous. You know, he underscores the idea that these teachings should be given out, this first ray orientation, which includes monads in general, because that's the first principle. Right? So, at any rate, though first ray monads in manifestation are very rare, what I just said, all monads carry the energy of the first principle, which is one with the first ray. For example, TCF tells us that, you know what that means, right? Everybody choose on cosmic fire? Okay. Tells us that when the one initiator applies his rod of power, the downflow of that power comes from the monad, right? So the initiate lines up, he has the sponsors, there's the initiator, but the downflow of power comes from this monad. So no matter what number that monad might be.
Where did you get this?
Oh, that's, and there's this artist whose name slips my mind right now. I should have her ascribed. But
this is one of the ones that DK used to train his laboratory.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
Really?
That kind of,
Yeah, it's, when, you know, with the color and the quality of it, it really, and also this kind of swastika kind of look, it just felt so dynamic. And I really should know this artist's name because they painted a lot during the Theosophical movement, you know, the 20s and 30s when it's just, and the colors that are just beautiful.
Harris?
Say again?
Lauren Harris?
I don't believe so.
He did some graphics, he also does too.
Oh, really?
In his latter days, he did a lot of graphics.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So collectively, human monads, which the secret doctrine calls the imperishable jivas, make up the throat center in the body of our planetary logos. You know, you've heard this, humanity makes up the throat center. You know, we are ultimately the monad. Because the nature of electricity on the monadic plane causes substance to cohere, a first-rate property, we can speculate that first-rate monads stand as a living center of this great chakra, acting as agents of this coherence. It's a painting that I'm incapable of creating, but imagine 5 billion points of light, presumably glowing first ray red, a red unknown in the realm of human endeavor. It's a point that you have to keep in mind. All the red that you see is symbolic of the red of the first ray. It's not a direct representation. like we might suppose that indigo and green are. Okay? It's symbolic of the actual color. It's one of the reasons I almost never use it in my artwork. Anyway, each of these points is a radiant monad of these 5 billion points at the center of this chakra, collectively holding this central point, thus inwardly linking it to the logoic head center and outwardly to the petals made up of all the monads of humanity. Having said this, it's really tricky assigning monads to any of any ray to specific chakras or centers. For example, in Dyna 2, DK says, the monad is to the planetary logos what the third eye is to man. So, you know, go figure. A lot of hints. The monad is to the planetary logos what the third eye is to man. So it's the organ of third eye to the planetary logos, which, you know, suggests that they make up that center, you know. So it's interesting. Okay. The mantra associated with first ray monads reads, the kingdom of God suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. Okay. Sounds kind of medieval, doesn't it? Pretty much every word in this mantra points to a higher corresponding concept. A concept which, we're told, veils a geometric form. A form, in turn, animated by an idea, which finally veils the actual energy being referred to. So you have to peel back a lot of layers to get to the meaning of this mantra. But undaunted, that's exactly what we'll do now. And all of this can only come to you through the intuition, your understanding of this mantra, essentially. So let's try to throw some light on it. It was probably translated by DK from Sinzar's illumined symbols, which reveal their meaning vibrationally to those who are able to read those symbols and really get a leg up. Okay. First of all, through the depiction of an event, taking of the kingdom of heaven by force, this mantra is describing a universal energy. We tend to imagine a Cecil B. DeMille movie, right? To balls and force, but it's a abstract universal energy that's being described here. And he's using this method of description, taking the kingdom of heaven by force, which stands beyond and is thus unfettered by space and time, this universal energy. It's the modus apparatus of the first ray. Okay. The opening line reads, the kingdom of God suffereth violence. Okay. The kingdom of God can be seen simply as the next step on the path. For a second initiate, it's the realm of the soul. For a seventh initiate, one of the cosmic paths, right? Now, for the first ray monad, there's some evidence suggesting that one step into the kingdom of God is the 7 atomic subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. But we'll come to that in a moment. Next, we get to the crux of the mantra, suffereth violence. The kingdom of God suffereth violence. It's a peculiar phrase. Well, we are told that all those who petition for entrance into a greater spiritual sphere of expression, such as an ashram, initially cause problems. And we can just imagine an unenlightened first ray aspirant's approach. Hey, let me in. Go away. You're not ready. Oh yeah? I don't care. I'll break down this door if you don't let me in. So, suffereth violence seems about right. Actually, suffereth in earlier times just meant allows for, right? It's the word violence that really takes us to the heart of the mantra. The most difficult task in considering this word is to strip away the negative connotations that we tend to associate with it. The term violence generally evokes emotional discomfort. I was actually going to bring a hammer and a piece of glass and whack it, but then I just back up. Even though we all know intellectually that form death is necessary, the idea of violence is jarring to our emotional equipment. Right? So while visiting Benares, India, I took a boat trip on the Ganges. As the boatman was, actually I did a whole series of paintings from this vantage point of the river. So as the boatman was rowing, his paddle struck a dead, floating infant child. I looked at him in panic, and he just smiled. Then I remembered that in the Hindu tradition, it is believed that young infants are returned to the Great Mother by consigning them to the sacred waters of the Ganges. So the boatman's smile told me that there was nothing remiss here, right? Everything was as it should be. Right? So, stripped of the emotional negative connotations, what seems like violence was simply the means by which form is discarded, disrupted, destroyed. And form disruption is a first-rate specialty. Okay? Strong's Biblical Concordance interprets the phrase, the kingdom of God suffereth violence, by downplaying its destructive connotations. You know, I think this phrase has always stuck in the craw of theologians. You know, violence towards God, you know, how can that be? You always get the sense that they're not comfortable with it. For instance, Strong's translation runs, "A share in the heavenly kingdom is sought for with the most ardent zeal and the intensest exertion." True enough, but this completely bypasses the destructive aspect of the first ray, and I think pretty much misses the point. So in Middle English, suffereth violence is translated as to allow for a marked or powerful effect. In Latin, violent means to carry force, a little closer to the mark, right? The last part of the mantra reads, "And the violent take it by force." DK tells us that the violent are first-rate monads, such as Paul of Tarsus, right? But then we have this information that, in fact, it was a fifth-rate monad. Is that correct?
And that's where I think where the dual ray comes in.
I see. Yeah. So it's a 1-5. Okay. So Paul of Tarsus, whose violent approach, quote unquote, penetrated into the realm of the monad. DK's statement is followed by a most provocative teaching. This will has to be utilized to the utmost by the evolving monad in his struggle to control each atomic subplane, unquote. This teaching introduces a couple of important ideas. First, DK's use of the term evolving monads. It's a big difference between an evolving monad and a monad on its own plane of endeavor, right? I mean, we're all evolving monads. However, since first-ray monads aren't, for the most part, or maybe at all, just don't know, incarnating right now, an evolving first-ray monad suggests, for the most part, a discarnate being striving at higher levels of consciousness. Nevertheless, I think it would be useful to consider some of the stages on the long and markedly difficult path of becoming that first-rate monads must walk. DK tells us that first-rate integrated personalities are, quote, frequently ruthless at first, selfish, ambitious, self-centered, cruel, often unlovable, but one-pointed, implacable, undeviating, aware of implications, of significances, and of the result of actions, but at the same time, unalterable and undeviating, moving forward to their purpose. They destroy and tear down in order to rise to greater heights upon the ruin they have wrought. They do thus rise. They trample on other men and upon destinies of the little person. They integrate their surroundings into an instrument for their will and move relentlessly forward. So you can see why there's not any room for these incarnation at this time. It's like they see the whole rest of the world as hot butter. Right? So the old commentary exhorts those who walk the line of the first ray to press outward into life, to close their ears to all outer voices, with body braced and mind alert. Right? The symbol for this stage on their path of becoming is a moving point of light above the brow. It's interesting, isn't it? It's, you know, the orientation here is that they walk a line rather than expand out from a point. So it's a moving point of light seen above the brow. You can just see DK's etheric vision at work here. So after gaining control of their environment, you know, which is a piece of cake, these wielders of dynamic power turn their penetrating force, because there's nothing else to do, on their own limitations. DK says, power selfishly used exhausts its user and evokes a display of power antagonistic to him. He is thereby destroyed because he has destroyed. He is separated off from his fellow men because he has been isolated and separative in his nature. He walks alone because he has cried forth to the world, I will brook no companion. I am the one alone. Wow. But, curiously, it is the agony of this isolation that causes first-rate types to begin to perceive the greater plan. Again, the old commentary. The one who travels on a line returns upon his way. You get a sense that the line doubles back on itself. Back to the center of his life he goes, and there he waits. He reaches out his arms and cries, I cannot stand and walk alone. And standing thus, a cross is formed. And on that cross, he takes his place with others. The center of the life that the old commentary is describing is the heart, which is pretty much foreign territory for first-rate types for a long time. They're kind of the last group to make it to the heart. But once they do, they're already so progressed that there's a different kind of alchemy that takes place as a result. There comes a point when all first-rate types must learn to love. If they don't, they are particularly vulnerable to the left-hand path. Right? Thus, self-forgetfulness is a key goal for first-rate types. When this is achieved, a light breaks through their consciousness that reveals all that they have destroyed. DK calls this the light that shocks, which they must then laboriously rebuild. A task that taxes even their power of will. As we can see, power is a unique path with its unique challenges. We're told that he who will enter upon the path of power must tear the source of evil out of his heart. And then the heart will bleed, and the whole life of the man seem to be utterly dissolved. This ordeal must be endured. It may come at the first step of the perilous ladder, which leads to the path of life. It may not come until the last, but, O disciple, remember that it has to be endured, and fasten the energies of your soul upon the task. Live neither in the present nor the future, but in the eternal. This great weed cannot flower there in the heart. This blot upon existence is wiped out by the very atmosphere of eternal thought. So, you know, he's speaking directly to first-rate types, you know. They must tear out must tear the source of evil out of their heart.
Now, that quote is by...
You know, I couldn't find the
It
inscription.
was by...
Great.
And it fits perfectly. It's Masters of Everything.
Oh, I couldn't find it in DK, and
There
yet I
we go,
did.
it's the 151. It's Paul of Tarsus again. Fits perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Okay. So eventually, after building love into all aspects of their expression, a required but particularly difficult and painful endeavor for first-rate types, they can, quote, be trusted to be God's destroying angels, angels who bring life through the destruction of the form. So let's get back to the earlier DK quote. First-rate monads must struggle to gain control of each atomic subplane. This is fascinating. Now, we can hypothesize that at some advanced stage in a first-rate monad's development, these atomic subplanes represent for them the kingdom of God, or entrance into this greater sphere of expression. Right? Atomic subplane, you know, sounds so technical, right? But these are levels of great beauty and power. For example, DK describes the Davis of the physical atomic subplane as being, quote, a glorious translucent lavender. The highest subplanes of the mental, of the emotional realm of idealism are what's on those highest subplanes, or what early theosophists called Summerland, which is the heaven of Christians. And on the highest subplane of the mental, we find the mental permanent atom, and spiritual telepathy becomes the preferred means of interactions. So we tend to think of these atomic subplanes as the top seventh of a whole plane, but we're told in TCF that they actually form a unity which constitutes the essence of the entire cosmic physical plane. In fact, from the perspective of the one life, which is the métier of first-rate monads, these subplanes are the cosmic physical plane, because the six lesser planes, subplanes, are ultimately illusory, right? A temporary myopic projection during periods of manifestation, but not essentially real. Atomic subplanes are the domain of all the permanent atoms of a human being. And TCF-DK says, apart from the permanent atom, the human physical body doesn't exist. Right? That's underscoring this myopic nature of the manifested six lower subplanes. Which is why at death, the human's life force is withdrawn from all the lower subplanes and is centralized within the permanent atom on the atomic subplane of each plane, right? Where the experience of that incarnation is assimilated and memory is preserved. Because first-rate monads also work on these atomic subplanes, possibly they play a part in the vivification of these vibratory storehouses. They may be, storekeepers in that way, especially when you think of the department of the Manu in the work that the Manu plays in the business of building the body, right? And so these first subplane storehouses are definitely the business of first-rate types in general. So all these atomic subplanes are conditioned by and expressive of the law of vibration, which sounds innocuous enough, but it is this law, working at full potency only on atomic subplanes, that initiates the creation of the material world. Oh, that. The substantive aspect of each plane, right? DK describes this process as the first setting in motion of Mula Prakriti. And then at the end of the cycle, the same law of vibration, quote, governs the transmutation of differentiated colors back to their synthesis. Sounds a lot like the Indian Brahma Vishnu Shiva cycle, and all contained in this law of vibration. So through this law, the 1 becomes 7, and at the end of the cycle, the 7 are reimmersed into the 1. So it's the atomic subplane from which this initiating destructive law manifests that the first-ray monad must, quote, struggle to control. Whether they actually wield this law of vibration, we're not told. Being part of the Department of the Manu, it seems a definite possibility. If they do direct this law, they would act in concord with the devas of the atomic subplane of whatever plane they're working in. But active or not, just to be conscious on the Adi subplane, these great beings would necessarily stand above and beyond the form aspect of that plane. Otherwise, they'd be swept out of existence during these lesser pralaya cycles, that happen, with every globe. And so they have this, well, HPB described them as the imperishable jivas. And this, could be one reason is they have their being in these imperishable regions, you could say. Right? And they have the will that conquers death. Death, that is, from the perspective of the live side. You could say that being conscious on the Adi subplane is a conquering of death, because that is the subplane of death, which is synthesis, a return to unity. So, first-ray monads are associated with the energy of the head center. There'll be a test later on this chart, which ties in closely to manas, the 5th ray, and the 5th plane. For example, when an initiate reaches a certain stage, the Kundalini fire is consciously directed through the use of the will, while at the same time under the control of the mind. So there's a strong 1-5 connection, right? We see it in polytarsis. First ray monad, probably with that second monadic level being at the 5th subray, possibly. One possibility anyway. Pluto rules the base of the spine and the head center in average man. Vulcan rules these in the initiate. BK tells us that a subtle correspondence exists between the monads of will on the 5th plane in relation to the 5th law and the 5th ray, and that the power aspect, ray 1, planes 1 and 5, and the law of vibration form one interlocking whole, which is really actually interesting. It may not seem to you that interesting, but the fact that the 5 in a sense is the 1 of the lower 3. So you have this vibratory connection between the highest of the two, the 1. Planes 1 and 5, as well as rays 1 and 5. So we also see the 1-5 connection to the fact that the monastic principle is first transmuted into wisdom and then eventually resolved into, quote, pure will or power. Given the close relationship between 1st and 5th planes, mastery on a mental atomic subplane would bring first-ray monads in contact with the highest group of Agni Shvatas, whose work is to blend and fuse the divine with the form aspect. Okay. Thus they are, I like this one better, thus they are, quote, those agents who pass the life of God through their bodies of flame as it descends from the higher into the lower, and again as it ascends from the lower into the higher. This is the life of God. Of course, it's going to be the first aspect. They are the substance and the life of the highest 2 subplanes of the mental plane. That's a direct quote. Certainly, the innate synthesizing capacity of first-ray monads would bring them into rapport with these beings. The close connection between these Agni Shvatas and the destructive aspect of the law of vibration can be seen in the part they played during the fourth initiation, where, quote, these great solar angels gather back into themselves the solar fire, thus producing the final dissipation of the form, and hence the separation of the life from the form. Sounds like a destroying angel to me, which is what these first-ray monads become, right? Once they can be trusted, once they have infused their, I'm not sure what they infuse, but they bring love into their system and they're motivated by love, right? Even though they direct the destructive power, right? Okay. In order to better understand the nature of first-ray monad, let's take a closer look at some of the energies they work with and within. First and foremost, the force, called for lack of better terms, will and power. These terms, when considered by the lower mind, though expressive of concepts related to first-rate types, are totally inadequate descriptions of the force wielded by first-ray monad. And this isn't just my idea. DK tells us until the end of this Mahamanvantara, or day of Brahma, we shall not be able to conceive of the first aspect of will or power as it really is. It's kind of like the color red. You just can't get there from here, right? But he does give us some clue as to its nature in this teaching. It's one of my favorite quotes on the first ray in general. That energy that we call will is the principle of victory, the ultimate goal of life when fruition is achieved. It is the final united success to a long foreseen purpose of spirit matter, life form, plus that something which is the dream and goal of the highest initiates in the hierarchy to contact, the secret revelation of Shambhala itself. That says it. Okay. Though the essential unmanifest nature of first-ray energy remains unknown, even we're told to those who have taken the sixth initiation, these initiates are able to comprehend something of the nature of power and will in manifestation. The highest form of this being the will to live. This fundamental, all-pervading will emanates from an entity who, and this is actually him, I took this shot myself, who we're told is, in this solar system, the embodiment of will. I don't remember my reading previous to this, reading about this entity, who we're told is, in this solar system, the embodiment of will. So that's interesting. Yeah, right. Well, of course, this is just my attempt to get something on the screen for that quote, you know. Also called the utilizer of forms, this being is the animating principle of all the 7 hierarchies in manifestation. So this is a huge consciousness, and it's first ray. Emanating the will to live. Right? Okay. No real understanding of first ray. How am I doing on time?
Good.
Okay, good. All right. I cut out right here, I cut out 2 pages of material on the transmitters of the word. So you can breathe a big sigh of relief as we go 3 pages down. Okay, no real understanding of first-ray monads can be had without considering Agni, who is the Lord of fire throughout this solar system. PK says, he is Vishnu and the sun in his glory. He is the fire of matter and the fire of mind blended and fused. He is the intelligence which throbs in every atom. He is the mind that actuates the system. He is the fire of substance and the substance of the fire. He is the flame and that which the flame destroys. Because Agni is the fiery essence of every atomic subplane of the cosmic physical plane, he forms and conditions the environment of all first-ray monads. You know, you could say that his essential nature is the sea of fire of the Adi plane, right? Which is the You know, that's the briar patch of first-rate monads, you know. If you need a mnemonic. Okay. Actually, he forms the environment of all life in the solar system, but he shows forth his unveiled fiery essence only on the atomic subplanes, including the sea of fire, that is the logoic plane. It is impossible to broaden our perspective to the point where we can fathom Agni's scope of influence. For he is, we're told, the animating life of the solar system, and that life is the energy of the logos, and the manifestation of the radiance which veils the central sun. Only as he is recognized as Fohat, the energy of matter, as wisdom, the nature of the ego and its motivation, and as essential unity, and there's the direct connection, can any due conception be arrived at as to his nature of being. You know, you just can't back up far enough to get any perspective on this being that is Agni. So it follows that Agni provides the environment for one's life experience in the solar system for even the highest initiates of our planet. Whether a first-rate monad is capable of discerning that which lies beyond Lord Agni, which would be the solar logos on the plane, is not revealed. What we do know is that because the métier of the first-rate monad is the Fohatic essence of Lord Agni, his entire environment in all his actions and activities, you know, okay, I won't go there, take place within Agni's ring pastime. So, on one or more of all the atomic subplanes, we have one, pervasive presence and environing influence of Fohat, who is the fiery essence of Lord Agni. Two, the working out of the law of vibration, which initiates and terminates all form life. Three, the Eva Lords directing the manifestation of the 6 subsequent subplanes of a plane. Four, the spirale of the physical permanent atom of the logi. I bet you all knew that, right? As well as the permanent atoms of human beings. Four, the transmitters of the word of the will of the logos. And 5, on the mental atomic subplane, the highest grade of solar angel. So all these form and condition habitat in the first monad. So let's go back and take a look at our first-rate mantra one last time. The kingdom of God suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. So I worked on this a while after doing this research, and here's my humble offering. One very limited way of interpreting this great mantra might be, and it certainly isn't all-inclusive, using its innate penetrating potency. First-rate monad gains awareness on the atomic subplanes of the cosmic physical plane through a focused utilization of the energy of will, thereby demonstrating a sequential control of each of these subplanes, thus opening the way to Shambhala and eventual identification with the Lord of the world, or something like that. It doesn't roll off the tongue quite like the real deal, does it? Okay. But because these lords of will are also lords of sacrifice, their attention is directed down into the cosmic physical plane, where it is not yet time for the fourth hierarchy to proceed into further realms of abstraction. I think this may have something to do with that monadic existence of the 7. It holds and anchors them here. It's like a sacrificial presence. Let's see, where was I? Yeah. Because doing so, you know, this abandoning would be to abandon their link with the lower worlds of soul and personality. So they're held through sacrifice. You know, probably much like Sanat Kumara. We're told that monads demonstrate through the spiritual triads much like the soul demonstrates through the personality, thus linking the atmic and mental levels. Interestingly, both vehicles, the spiritual triad and the personality, demonstrate the threefold nature of deity. One in its essence, the other in the world called the form. It's the movement from the personality vehicle to the spiritual triad that is described in the Gayatri as from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real, from death to immortality. Let's see here. In EP1, DK says, yeah, you're here. Got behind one. The first ray is the controller of the death drama in all kingdoms, and destruction of form, which brings about release of power and permits entrance into light through the gateway of death. The intent of the Lord of the first ray is to stand behind his 6 brothers, and when they have achieved their purpose, to shatter the forms which they have built. This he does by passing his power through their bodies, and their united effort leads to abstraction and a return to the center whence the initial impulse came. And I'd like to leave you, if you forget everything else about this presentation, I would like to leave you with this one very important word. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, say what? Oh.
The question about the availability in incarnation of first-ray monads. So maybe you looked that up, but from the moon chain, about 12.5% were that, and second, and they were apparently then transported to a program that would see their fruition in the 7th root race. Yeah. But and that is very interesting. When I study the disciples in the DK's group, I suspect that 3 of them were first-ray monads.
Oh.
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Well, first of all, for one of them, GSS, Elsie Miller or something like that, he pretty well says you're a first-ray monad, and you've just got a situation of hyper-intensity that is making you sort of unfit for the work because you're just too much. It's too much for you. The other was Eugene Cosgrove. It just seems almost obvious that the reason that he had to write on Shambhala and so forth was because of that monadic ray. And I talked to some of his students, and they just were, they were totally captivated by his first ray. The other one was the Jean Mochart, who was a PD, what? I'm sorry, I've lost, PDW, Patience, Dynamic Thought, and Wisdom. So he was a second-ray soul, and that's how it was working out, a good astrologer, and he was killed in the war and so forth. But then DK described what he was doing afterwards and how Mochart was helping in his ashram, second ray and all that, because he had a lot of wisdom, and then now he has returned to his true master, the Master Morya. And there was not one first ray factor in his ray chart.
Wow.
So obviously, in other words, some of them are around, but maybe no pure, as you said, no pure first ray.
Which could mean like monad soul alignment.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Or personality.
Yeah, I mean, what does it mean by, sort of straight through? Except you kind of wonder about Master Morya, don't you? And people like that, right? He uses the word people for monads, kind of interesting. So, Master Morya is the first ray soul, obviously, but what's his monadic ray as head of the ashram? Is it possible that he has that first sub-ray on the monadic plane and can thereby direct an ashram just the way Paul of Tarsus did with his 5th sub-ray, but then up on the higher level, maybe it's not first ray. If there's no pure first ray type, or maybe he's just exempted because he is already there, So some of them are here, and some of them are even in, you know, the DK group. So to think that maybe they don't have any place in our lives is probably, they are present, and especially the ones that were from the moon chain. You kind of wonder about that, you know. Like, for instance, I think the ones you're talking about were incarnated in Atlantis, or individualized, and thereby very much delayed until the 7th root race. But there were others that were older, as old as the third ray monads, you know, and came from the moon chain, and maybe they made further progress, you know. It's a fascinating subject, and I think if you look at, you know, you can use all kinds of quotes about personalities, souls, whatever, and they'll all apply somehow to that highest impulse, because after all, it's just the monad anyway, isn't it? You know, when you come down, that's all it is. It just has different levels of limitation. We call it by different things, but it's all the monad anyway. So it's very, yeah, okay, very good, thank you. I mean, thank you, yeah. Any questions? Do you have questions of Francis, all you first-rate monads out there?
Right. Yeah. Just keep in mind that I know quite a bit less about first-rate monads now than when I started.
It's important.
You know, just you really feel like you're standing on the edge of the mysteries when you get into these subjects, because this is the kind of thing that's just not revealed, you know, so much of it. You know. But I'm happy to take your questions, because I never let ignorance get in my way. Yes?
Have you talked about spiruli in one of your quotes there?
Oh my God, she picked up on that.
Yeah.
It's the let's see, the logoic spiruli. Spiruli are located on the first subplane, on that Adi subplane.
What is it?
You know, Michael asked me before that if there were any questions, could he please take any questions on the spiruli? So I'm going to go ahead and pass this one.
Well, you know, just to complicate the issue and thus evade the answer, there are these things called the bubbles in the koilon, and there are 14 billion of them basically, and koilon, K-O-I-L-O-N, and they form the spiruli, and it turns out that our synthesizing planets are directly connected with these permanent atoms of the solar logos. Saturn is literally, you know, just correct me if I'm incorrect here, literally the permanent atom on the logoic plane, and really rules the entire cosmic physical plane. And then turns out that Neptune is a correspondence to that, but not the literal permanent atom, and that Uranus is a higher correspondence on the logoic mental plane, the cosmic mental plane. So we have the synthesizing planets taking the place, and they, through their quality, have the different phases of the unfoldment of the plan on the particular plane that they rule. And the spiruli are, well, I don't know how many, I suppose there may be 7, but in the spiritual triad there's only 3. You know, I mean, there's only 3, but let's just say that the completion of a spirula cycle is very much like a round for planets and for schemes. And they are determined in time, and their unfoldment reveals certain cycles that are to come to pass and eventually be fulfilled. And we're by no means finished with the Saturnian cycle, however many spirulae it may have.
And don't we also have them? And
Yes,
that they
yes.
determine the,
Yeah.
you know, your level of consciousness is determined by how many are active and have come into consciousness. And I remember the key number, not surprisingly, is 4. And when that
4 for the
fourth
human-
spiruli becomes active. Yes, Dwayne?
best visual description of the spirelli.
You can see Italian pronunciation.
Thank you.
July.
The best way to describe the spirelli is that they are the magnetic and electrical bands that wind their way around what is called the ultimate atom or the divine anu, and that all of the rays and planes, all of the chakras and the different levels of development are inherently aligned with this spherical life that rotates. It has a northern point and a southern point. And these different atoms nest one within the other, so that if you were to look at the 7 rays or the 7 planes, you would see that they are these concentric spherical entities that, depending on their level of development, have the activation of these bands, and then there's secondary bands. And as somebody pointed out, that the higher you go, the less the numerical amount of bands, because you're going, to use the rays as an example, you're going from the 4 lesser rays into the 3 primary rays.
Yeah.
And the physical, emotional, and mental permanent atoms have their own unique characteristics. I think the Tibetan describes the astral as being like in the shape of a heart with a depression at the top. And that the Buddhic, in contrast, is more like the lemonscape or the figure 8, Michael, that you described in an earlier presentation. Okay, thank
And
you.
that's so interesting because, here, you can keep that out there. That's so interesting because Mercury is the guardian at the 8th gate, and Mercury is the ruler of the Buddhic plane, and Mercury is producing this Antikarana 8 shape. So the figure 8 and Buddhi and Mercury are fitting very, very well together. But you basically, when you get onto the triadal level of the cosmic physical plane, everything simplifies, right? So, from the cosmic perspective, you have to go to some of these other cosmic planes to get the same kind of parallel simplification. The only trouble is, we don't know whether the cosmic planes are actually atomic. Does that make sense? In other words, we have a lot of divisions on the cosmic physical plane. It's very much a mosaic world of many fragments, but we don't know whether in the archetypal worlds that fragmentation continues. This is a big, big question as we ascend the cosmic planes. But one of the major things, and Dwayne has talked about this, and we've heard it, is that the planes themselves are spiridae. See, in a larger sense, the rays are, and there's going to be someone, probably just Dwayne and whatever, draw this diamond, the snake diamond, and all that. The east to west rotation of the planes are the spiridae, and the rays are rotating north to south, and you get this incredible cross and all that design,
Tapestry of the gods.
Yeah, I know, but you're the visual man, and I pass it over to you.
There actually is an illustration out there about spirally. It's Babbitt's atom, which is in Treatise on Cosmic Fire. And if you look real close, I actually took that into a 3D program and rebuilt it in 3D. It took me about 3 months. And what it is this skeletal-like, what you were describing, this depression in the top. There's this kind of angular tube that goes down. But the point is that it's a recirculation of the energy, and all of these tube-like appendages are wrapped tightly in these spherulae, and then the notes tell you that each of those is wrapped in further spherulae, but they don't illustrate that because it's the limitations of the medium.
You see, in all of this, we're using the third ray and subsequent rays of attributes to describe things as if from a distance. But the life aspect is ruled pretty much by the 246. And the whole other approach is qualitative and what it means to our experience. See what I mean? We can be scientific and study objectively, we have to do that. And then what difference does it make energetically in our lives? This is the thing where we esoteric types can get inside the mental plane and beyond it in a way. Of course, obviously I'm called Kevin Black. I've been doing the mental thing for a long time, but I'm realizing that the energetic impact of the qualitative aspect of life is what will make us real in our appreciation of these inner and higher levels. So look, it just depends on how much you want to expand and deepen. It's really up to us, and the time equation is very much in our own hands, and the mind leads us into the possibilities, and then we have time to play with. The masters are always playing with time. What does he say? Time and space are their playthings. So we have a little playing to do too, and we can determine whether we're really going to expand into these things or just kind of go along, you know. So this is the moment to decide, you know, the hour of decision. So Billy Graham of the Institute. Yeah, Bob, Robert. Pass it to Robert.
Sorry? Yeah.
We can't take too much longer, just
All right, this is very quick. The quote that other than the physical permanent atom, the physical body does not exist. Could we take that correspondence up through the next 4 planes?
Well, wait a second. What other than the physical body?
Physical permanent atom.
Okay,
Physical body.
It exists, but it's not necessarily ruled by a synthesizing planet in exactitude. That's what it is. In other words, Saturn is literally the physical permanent atom of the solar logos, whereas Uranus and Neptune are correspondences to the physical permanent atom, connected with it. So it doesn't say they don't exist. They do exist, but can you connect the synthesizing planets with them directly? That's the question.
Okay, I thought the quote said that the physical body does not exist. Could you pull that up, Francis? We can move on. It doesn't matter.
It's you know, we can.
It would take up, I'm not sure where that is. That's fine.
We'll look for that. And look, nothing exists.
Well,
We'll take it far enough. I mean, you know, this is the Mahamaya world, and it's all self-perception, you know. So, look, you know, here's our physical body. Does it cause us any trouble in its non-existence? You know what I mean? It's non-existent in an ultimate real sense, but it's a very real myopic actuality. See, there's a difference between reality and actuality. Okay, but now, you know, if we get into the qualitative side of things, maybe things look a little different. And we live in an astroglyphic solar system, and I still haven't figured out yet whether this number 60 billion is a very paltry number. It's a paltry number for the entire solar system, given the fact that there is man on every planet. So, you know, when we're playing around with 60 billion, I feel there's a blind there. That, you know, because it would be much more appropriate for our planet because 6/7 of the monads are always out of incarnation. So what do you got? You know, maybe, let's say we have 5 billion or 6 billion. How many people do we have externalizing?
7 billion.
So 6 billion, so what is the proportion there? If 6 billion is 1/7, then it's a 42 billion even on our planet of human monads, even that. So what are you going to do? You know, stint for the rest of the planets, and even though they have man, are we going to make so few of them? This is just revealing to you that you have a nervous system. Okay. Anyway, it's a question and it doesn't have to be answered now.